The email wasn't meant for me. That much was obvious from the subject line, final Bali itinerary confirmation, and the fact that it came from my husband's executive assistant Christina at 2 in the morning. I almost deleted it, another piece of corporate correspondence accidentally sent to the wrong Sullivan. But something made me open it. Maybe intuition, maybe the universe trying to tell me something, maybe just the insomnia that had plagued me since my husband Ethan started working such long hours. Inside was a detailed travel itinerary for a 2-week trip to Bali, departing in 3 days, exactly matching the surprise anniversary vacation Ethan had presented me with last week. Luxury resort, couples massages, private beach dinners, everything perfectly planned. Except this itinerary had 2 names, Ethan Sullivan and someone called Vanessa Chen, listed as his companion, with a note at the bottom about keeping it off corporate cards and using his personal American Express. My name is Meredith Sullivan. I've been married for 8 years, and I just discovered my husband booked the same vacation twice. One version with his wife, and one version with whoever Vanessa Chen was. I had 72 hours until my flight to Bali, 72 hours to decide whether to confront him or to do something smarter. I chose smarter. I didn't board my plane to Bali. Instead, I took a taxi to an address buried in Christina's email attachments, and what I found there changed everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my husband, and the life we'd supposedly built together. Ethan Sullivan and I met at a tech industry mixer in Seattle 10 years ago. He was 28, a rising product manager at a promising startup called Cascade Analytics. I was 26, working in marketing for a boutique firm that specialized in tech clients. He had the kind of confidence that came from genuine competence rather than arrogance, the ability to explain complex data architecture in ways that made sense to non-technical people like me. We dated for 18 months before he proposed on a hiking trip to Mount Rainier, the ring presented at sunrise with the mountain as backdrop, perfectly orchestrated but somehow still feeling spontaneous and romantic. The wedding was modest by Seattle tech standards, 150 people at a waterfront venue, my family flying in from Ohio, his parents driving up from Portland. We honeymooned in Costa Rica, 2 weeks of beaches and rainforests, and the kind of easy compatibility that made marriage feel like the most natural thing in the world. For the first few years, we were genuinely happy. Ethan's career accelerated when Cascade Analytics was acquired by a larger firm. He became VP of Product Development, his salary jumping from comfortable to genuinely wealthy. We bought a house in Madison Park, a renovated Craftsman with views of Lake Washington, the kind of property that had seemed impossible when we first moved to Seattle. I transitioned to freelance marketing consulting, giving me flexibility for the family we planned to start. Except we didn't start a family, not because we weren't trying, but because Ethan kept saying the timing wasn't right. Too many projects at work, too much travel, too many critical product launches that required his complete focus. Next quarter, he'd say, next year. After this acquisition closes, after we hit our revenue targets. The delays accumulated like sediment until one day I realized we'd been married for 5 years and children had gone from our shared goal to something we didn't discuss anymore. I filled the space with work, taking on bigger clients, building my own consulting practice. Ethan filled it with longer hours at the office, business trips that stretched from days to weeks, dinners with clients and investors and board members. We became one of those couples who communicated through shared calendars and coordinated schedules, who had sex twice a month with the efficiency of people checking a box on a relationship maintenance list. But I told myself we were fine. Marriage evolved, everyone said so. The passionate early years gave way to comfortable partnership. This was normal. This was what building a life together looked like. Then came our 7th anniversary. Ethan was in New York for a week, something about courting potential acquisition targets. He called on our actual anniversary, apologized for missing it, promised to make it up when he returned. When he got back to Seattle, he announced he'd booked a surprise trip. 2 weeks in Bali, he said, his smile genuinely excited. 5-star resort, private villa, everything we'd talked about doing but never made time for. I know I've been absent lately, he continued. I know work has consumed too much of my attention. This is me making it right, Mary. Just us. No phones, no emails, complete disconnection. I'd hugged him, feeling guilty for the doubts I'd been harboring, for the moments I'd wondered if we were growing apart. This was the Ethan I'd married, the man who remembered what mattered, who made grand gestures to show he cared. We spent the next week planning excursions, researching restaurants, talking about finally having time to reconnect. Then Christina's email arrived at 2:07 in the morning, 3 days before we were supposed to leave. I was awake because Ethan was snoring, a recent development that made sharing a bed difficult. I'd migrated to the guest room around midnight, bringing my phone to set an alarm for an early client call. The email notification lit up my screen. Final Bali itinerary confirmation. I opened it thinking it was details about our trip, maybe spa appointments or dinner reservations that Ethan had arranged. Instead, I found a complete travel itinerary. Flights from Seattle to Bali departing October 15th, first class on Singapore Airlines. Private car service from Denpasar Airport to the Amanusa Resort. Villa reservation for 2 weeks. Master suite with private pool. Couples massage appointments, private beach dinners, snorkeling excursions, everything Ethan and I had discussed. Except the names were wrong. Guest 1, Ethan Sullivan. Guest 2, Vanessa Chen. Not Meredith Sullivan, not Mrs. Sullivan, not even a generic +1. A specific name listed with the same casual certainty as Ethan's, as if Vanessa Chen had every right to be there. I scrolled down, my hands starting to shake. More details. Dietary restrictions for both guests, Ethan's shellfish allergy that I'd carefully noted when planning our own meals, and apparently Vanessa was vegetarian. Spa preferences, she liked deep tissue massage, while Ethan preferred Swedish. Room requests, king bed with ocean view, champagne and strawberries upon arrival. At the bottom of the itinerary was a payment confirmation. Ethan's personal American Express, not the corporate card. Total cost $32,000 for 2 weeks, including flights, accommodation, and pre-booked excursions. And a note in Christina's administrative style, processed per your request, kept separate from corporate accounts, confirmation sent only to your personal email and Miss Chen's private address. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't Christina confusing me with someone else. This was a deliberately separate arrangement, carefully hidden from corporate records, sent to private emails, booked on personal cards. Ethan had planned 2 vacations, one with his wife, departing October 15th, and one with Vanessa Chen, departing the same day, going to the same destination, staying at the same resort. My first instinct was to wake him, to throw my phone at his face, to demand an explanation. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the lawyer's daughter in me, my father's voice echoing from childhood about never confronting without understanding the full situation first. Maybe it was self-preservation, some instinct that said reacting emotionally would put me at a disadvantage. I went downstairs to my office, closed the door, and started researching. Vanessa Chen wasn't hard to find. LinkedIn showed her as Senior Director of Business Development at Cascade Analytics, Ethan's company. She joined 18 months ago, recruited from a competitor, described in her profile as a strategic partnership specialist with expertise in Asian markets. Her photo showed a woman in her early 30s, polished and professional in that specific way Seattle tech women cultivated, expensive but understated. I found her on Instagram. Private account but public profile picture matching her LinkedIn photo. Facebook showed limited information, relationship status hidden, but tagged photos at company events, including several with Ethan, the 2 of them at a conference in San Francisco, at a team dinner in Austin, at what looked like a board retreat in Whistler. All professional, all explainable, except now I was seeing them differently. The way Ethan's hand rested on her shoulder in one photo, the way they stood slightly closer than colleagues typically did, the way she looked at him in a candid shot, an expression that suggested familiarity beyond professional respect. I went back through my own photos and memories. Ethan had mentioned Vanessa before, I realized. The new BD director who was killing it with partnerships, the colleague who really understood the Asian market strategy, the team member who'd been instrumental in closing a major deal. He'd talked about her the way he talked about other colleagues, casual and professional, nothing that raised flags. But now every mention took on different meaning. I checked our shared calendar. Ethan's schedule was full of meetings, travel, client dinners. But Vanessa Chen's name never appeared directly. Instead, there were generic entries like BD strategy session and partnership review and market expansion planning. Vague enough to be legitimate, specific enough to not raise questions. I thought about all the late nights Ethan had worked, all the business trips that seemed to multiply, all the times he'd been too tired for conversation, too distracted for connection, too busy for the relationship maintenance we'd let slip. How many of those hours had been with Vanessa Chen? How long had this been happening? The email timestamp glowed on my screen. 2:07 a.m. Christina had sent this in the middle of the night, probably working late, probably exhausted enough to confuse my email with Ethan's. One wrong recipient, one tired assistant, and Ethan's entire secret unraveled. I should have felt devastated. Part of me did, a hollow ache spreading through my chest. But another part felt oddly calm, almost relieved. This explained everything. The emotional distance, the postponed family plans, the sex that felt obligatory rather than connected. I hadn't been imagining the disconnect. It was real, and it had a name and a face and a fucking vacation itinerary. I spent the rest of the night gathering information. I forwarded Christina's email to a private account Ethan didn't know about, one I used for client work. I screenshot everything, saved it to a cloud drive he couldn't access. I went through our financial records, looking for other irregularities. The $32,000 charge to Ethan's personal Amex was there, dated 3 weeks ago, listed as travel services. But there were other charges I hadn't noticed before. Jewelry from a boutique downtown, $9,000, purchased 4 months ago. I'd never received jewelry. Flowers from an upscale florist, 5 separate charges ranging from $200 to $400. I'd never received flowers. Restaurant charges at places Ethan had never taken me. Hotels in cities where he'd supposedly been staying with clients. Every charge was on his personal card, the one I had access to view, but rarely checked because we'd always trusted each other with money. That trust now looked like negligence. By dawn, I had a rough outline of what looked like an affair that had been ongoing for at least 6 months, possibly longer. Financially, Ethan had been careful, using his personal money rather than our joint accounts. But emotionally, he'd been careless, assuming I wouldn't notice his absence, his distraction, his fundamental disconnection from our marriage. At 7 a.m., Ethan woke up and came downstairs, surprised to find me in my office. "You're up early," he said, kissing the top of my head with casual affection. "Client call." I managed a smile. "Something like that. Excited about Bali? 3 more days?" He grinned, and I saw genuine excitement in his expression. It felt like a knife. "I've been counting down. It's going to be amazing, Mary. Just what we need. Just what we need?" As if a luxury vacation could fix what was broken. As if he wasn't planning an identical trip with someone else. I let him leave for work, maintained the fiction of normalcy, then immediately called my best friend, Jessica. She arrived an hour later, took one look at my face, and said what happened. I showed her everything. The email, the research, the financial records. She went through the same emotions I had, shock and anger and something like vindication. "I knew something was off," she said finally. "The last few times we've all gotten together, Ethan's been so distant. Like he's physically present but mentally somewhere else. What are you going to do?" I don't know yet, I admitted. Part of me wants to confront him right now, but Dad always said, never start a fight without knowing how you'll win it. Jessica, who knew my father and his pragmatic approach to conflict, nodded slowly. You're thinking like a strategist. That's good. Emotion is valid, but strategy is what protects you. I need to understand the full situation before I make any moves. How long has this been going on? How serious is it? Is Vanessa Chen the first or just the latest? What does Washington state law say about infidelity and asset division? We spent the morning researching. Washington was a no-fault divorce state, meaning infidelity didn't technically impact asset division, but fraud did. If Ethan had been spending marital assets on an affair, that could be considered dissipation of marital funds. If he'd been lying about business expenses, claiming personal spending as corporate, that had legal implications. And if he'd been planning to abandon me for someone else, that affected how I approach property division, spousal support, everything. By afternoon, I'd contacted a divorce attorney, a woman Jessica's sister had used during her own divorce. Her name was Patricia Monroe, and her reputation for aggressive but strategic representation was exactly what I needed. She agreed to see me that evening. The consultation was illuminating. Patricia, a sharp woman in her 50s with gray hair she wore without apology, reviewed everything I'd brought. "This is good documentation," she said after an hour. "Very thorough. If we're building a case for dissipation of assets, this gives us a strong foundation. But I need to be honest with you, Meredith. Washington's division of community property is presumptively equal. Even with proof of an affair, even with evidence he spent marital funds inappropriately, you're looking at roughly 50-50 split of assets acquired during marriage. Unless," she paused, looking at me over her reading glasses, "there's a prenuptial agreement?" There was. Ethan had insisted on it before we married, not because he didn't trust me, he'd said, but because his startup equity was complicated and he wanted to protect both of us if things went wrong. I'd agreed because I was 26 and in love, and it seemed like a reasonable adult thing to do. The prenup was standard, as far as I knew. Separate property remained separate, community property would be divided fairly, spousal support was limited. Patricia's expression shifted when I mentioned it. I need to see that prenup immediately. There might be morality clauses, infidelity provisions, things that could change the equation significantly. I drove home and retrieved the prenup from our safe, a document I hadn't looked at in 8 years. Reading it now with different context, several clauses stood out. Section 7, Fidelity and Conduct. Either party engaging in infidelity or fraudulent financial conduct forfeits claim to spousal support and agrees to unequal distribution of community assets in favor of the wronged party. Section 12, Business Assets. All equity and compensation related to Cascade Analytics remains separate property of Ethan Sullivan, provided said employment does not involve fraudulent or criminal conduct, in which case all protections are void. Section 15, Dispute Resolution. In event of divorce, both parties agree to mediation before litigation, with specific arbitrator designated and binding resolution expected within 90 days of filing. I photographed every page and sent them to Patricia. Her response came within an hour. This changes everything. If we can prove infidelity, which the itinerary strongly suggests, and fraudulent financial conduct, which the hidden expenses indicate, Ethan has potentially voided his own prenup protections. His Cascade equity, which is probably worth $20 to $30 million at current valuation, could become community property subject to division. More importantly, this prenup has teeth. You're not just looking at keeping what you brought to the marriage. You're potentially looking at getting significantly more than half of everything he built during the marriage. But, and this is critical, we need ironclad proof. A suspicious email isn't enough. We need documentation of actual infidelity, of him and Vanessa Chen together, in a context that proves the affair. We need financial forensics showing systematic deception. We need evidence that would hold up in arbitration, or if it comes to it, in court. Can you do that? Can you keep your composure while gathering evidence? Can you play the role of unsuspecting wife while documenting everything? I thought about the last 8 years, the dreams I'd postponed, the family I'd wanted, the career opportunities I'd passed up to be flexible for Ethan's ambitions, the emotional labor I'd poured into a marriage that he was apparently abandoning for someone younger and more professionally exciting. Yes, I said, I can absolutely do that. Patricia smiled, and it wasn't kind. Good. Then here's what we're going to do. Over the next 2 days, I became someone I didn't recognize. I smiled at Ethan over breakfast. I discussed Bali plans with enthusiasm. I packed my suitcase with resort wear and sunscreen and books I'd been meaning to read. I played the role of excited wife so convincingly that Ethan visibly relaxed, probably relieved I hadn't discovered his secret, probably already imagining his 2 weeks with Vanessa Chen. Meanwhile, I was executing Patricia's strategy. I hired a private investigator, a former Seattle PD detective named Marcus Webb, who specialized in infidelity cases. I gave him all my documentation, plus Ethan's schedule and known patterns. I accessed our cell phone records through our shared account, downloaded 6 months of call and text logs. I couldn't read the actual messages, but I could see frequency and timing. Ethan and Vanessa Chen texted constantly, often late at night, sometimes for hours. I created a separate credit card in my name only, using it to pay Patricia's retainer and Marcus's fees, money that couldn't be traced to joint accounts that Ethan wouldn't see on our statements. I contacted our financial advisor and requested complete portfolio statements, claiming I wanted to review our investments for retirement planning. The advisor, who'd always dealt primarily with Ethan, seemed surprised but complied. I documented everything about Ethan's behavior, the nights he came home late, the times his phone buzzed and he stepped out of the room to respond, the weekend he claimed to be at a company retreat, but Marcus confirmed he was actually at a hotel in Portland with Vanessa. I played the perfect wife while building the perfect case, and part of me marveled at how easy the deception was. Maybe because I'd had practice. Maybe because I'd been deceiving myself for years about the state of our marriage, and turning that deception outward just required redirecting the energy. On October 14th, the day before our scheduled departure to Bali, Ethan came home with flowers and champagne. "Tomorrow," he said, pouring 2 glasses, "tomorrow we finally reconnect. I'm turning off my phone for 2 weeks. No work, no distractions, just us." He seemed genuinely excited, which made it worse somehow. He really believed he could maintain both relationships, keep both women satisfied, divide himself between wife and mistress without consequence. I smiled and clinked glasses, already knowing I wouldn't be on that plane. At midnight, while Ethan slept, I received a text from Marcus. "Package delivered. Check your secure email." I opened my laptop in the guest room bathroom, door locked, and found Marcus's report. Photos of Ethan and Vanessa leaving a hotel together in Portland, time stamped from the weekend he'd claimed to be at a company retreat. Photos of them at a restaurant in Seattle, seated at an intimate table, holding hands across the candles. Photos of Vanessa entering Ethan's downtown office building at 9 p.m. on a night he'd texted me saying he was working late alone. And one particularly damning photo taken through a window at what appeared to be a corporate apartment. Ethan and Vanessa, clearly together, clearly intimate, time-stamped 3 weeks ago. Marcus's accompanying notes were detailed, financial analysis showing pattern of gifts, travel, and accommodations provided to Vanessa Chen. Witness statements from restaurant staff, hotel employees, and a parking garage attendant who recognized the couple. Phone records showing thousands of texts and hundreds of calls between Ethan and Vanessa over the past 8 months, and copies of emails Marcus had obtained through a contact at Cascade Analytics, messages between Ethan and Vanessa that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. Everything Patricia had requested, everything we needed. I forwarded it all to Patricia with a simple message: ready to proceed. Her response came at 1 a.m. Don't get on that plane tomorrow. Follow the alternate plan we discussed. Game on. I went back to bed, lying next to my husband, listening to him snore, thinking about the life we'd built and how it had all been a carefully constructed fiction. Tomorrow, Ethan would wake up excited about his secret vacation with Vanessa. Tomorrow, he'd expect me to board a plane to Bali, the decoy trip that would keep me occupied while he enjoyed 2 weeks with his mistress. Tomorrow, he'd discover that sometimes the person you're deceiving is smarter than you gave them credit for. I didn't sleep. I lay awake, planning, thinking, feeling nothing but cold determination. By dawn, I knew exactly what I was going to do. October 15th arrived with typical Seattle rain, gray skies that matched my mood perfectly. Ethan woke up early, unusually energetic for 6 in the morning, already dressed and checking his phone. Our flight's at 11, he said, kissing my forehead. We should leave for the airport by 9 to be safe. International terminal. You know how security can be. I nodded, still in bed, watching him pack last-minute items. His good cologne, the one he saved for special occasions. Nice clothes, more than necessary for a beach vacation. The leather journal I'd given him for his birthday, supposedly for work notes, but apparently now for documenting his romantic getaway. He was meticulous, organized, the same qualities that had made him successful in business now being applied to maintaining a double life. I'll make coffee, he said, heading downstairs. Take your time getting ready. I waited until I heard him in the kitchen, then quickly dressed in the outfit I'd planned. Jeans, comfortable shirt, jacket with pockets, not vacation clothes, traveling clothes. I grabbed the small bag I'd packed secretly last night, containing my laptop, documents, copies of everything Marcus had gathered, and essentials for a few days away. My actual suitcase, the one Ethan thought I'd be taking to Bali, sat conspicuously by the bedroom door, fully packed as expected. I carried it downstairs performing normalcy. Ethan had made coffee and was scrolling through his phone, probably coordinating with Vanessa about their real trip. The duplicity was almost impressive in its complexity. Ready for paradise, he asked, smiling that smile that used to make me feel loved and now just made me feel sad. Ready for truth, I said, which he took as enthusiasm about the vacation. At 8:30, right on schedule, Ethan loaded our luggage into his Tesla. We drove toward the airport through morning traffic, and I watched Seattle pass by the windows, the city I'd called home for a decade, wondering what it would look like when I returned as a different version of myself. Ethan talked about the resort, the excursions he'd planned, how he'd researched the best snorkeling spots. He was a good liar, I realized, not because he never told the truth, but because he mixed truth with fiction so seamlessly that detecting the seams required careful attention. We were 10 minutes from the airport when my phone rang. Jessica, right on schedule, I answered, putting it on speaker as we'd planned. Mary, oh my God, Jessica's voice carried urgent panic. It's my mom. She's in the ER. They think it's her heart. I need you. Can you come? I looked at Ethan, whose expression shifted from confusion to concern to calculation. I could almost see him weighing options, trying to figure out how this affected his plans. Jess, I'm literally on my way to the airport right now, I said, loading my voice with appropriate distress. Our flight leaves in 2 hours. My mom, Mary. Jessica's voice broke convincingly. She's asking for you. You're like a daughter to her. Please, I need someone there who isn't falling apart. Ethan pulled into the airport departure area, putting the car in park. He looked at me, conflict clear on his face. You should go, he said finally. Family emergency. That takes priority. But the trip, I protested, playing my role. We've been planning this for weeks. You can't miss Bali because of me. We'll reschedule, he said, already mentally rearranging his plans. I'll call the resort, see if we can postpone. Your friendship with Jessica matters more than a vacation. The offer sounded generous, would have been generous if I didn't know the truth. Ethan wasn't sacrificing anything. He had another trip planned, another companion waiting. My cancellation didn't ruin his vacation, it just simplified his logistics. No, I said, firmly. You go. You've been working so hard you need this break. I'll stay here, help Jessica, and we'll do Bali another time. Are you sure? Ethan asked, but I could see relief in his eyes. He wanted me to insist, wanted permission to leave me behind. I'm sure. Go enjoy the beach, decompress, come back refreshed. We'll have our trip later. Jessica's still on the line, crying softly. Another nice touch. Ethan hugged me, kissed me with what seemed like genuine affection. I love you, Mary. I'll call you when I land in Bali. Tell Jessica I hope her mom is okay. I got out of the car, grabbed my suitcase from the trunk, and watched him drive away toward long-term parking. He'd board his flight to Bali, he'd meet Vanessa at the gate, or maybe they'd plan to board separately, maintaining deniability. They'd fly first class to Singapore, connect to Denpasar, check into the Amanusa resort under his name with her listed as companion. They'd spend 2 weeks in paradise, believing they'd gotten away with it. Except I wasn't going to the ER. Jessica's mom wasn't sick, and I wasn't the abandoned wife heading home to an empty house. I called a taxi from the ride-share area, giving the driver an address in Redmond that had appeared in one of the email attachments Christina had accidentally sent. The billing address for charges related to Vanessa Chen, an apartment complex called The Residences at Bella Vista. Luxury high-rises with concierge service and views of the Cascade Mountains. Exactly the kind of place Ethan would set up a mistress. The drive took 30 minutes. I paid cash, a detail Patricia had insisted on. No electronic trail, no way to prove where I'd gone if questions arose later. The Residences had the kind of lobby that screamed expensive, all marble and modern art, and a doorman who looked at me with professional courtesy. "Can I help you?" he asked. "I'm here to see Vanessa Chen, Unit 4214. I smiled like I belonged there. "She's expecting me." The doorman checked his computer, frowned slightly. "Ms. Chen isn't currently in the building. I can call up to her unit if you'd like." "Actually, I have a key," I lied smoothly. "I'm helping her with some things while she's traveling." "She mentioned you might be stopping by," he said, accepting the fiction because people in expensive buildings were trained not to question too aggressively. "Elevators to your left." I rode up to the 42nd floor, heart pounding but hands steady. The hallway was empty, thickly carpeted, silent in that way expensive places always are. Unit 4214 had a door that looked like all the others, anonymous and secure. I didn't have a key, but I did have something better. Marcus Webb, who'd done surveillance on this building, had provided information about security systems and access protocols. The Residences used electronic locks that could be overridden with the right equipment. Equipment Marcus had provided for exactly this purpose, a small device that looked like a key fob, but actually cycled through electronic signatures until it found a match. It took 3 minutes. The lock clicked green. I pushed open the door and stepped into Vanessa Chen's life. The apartment was beautiful, floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing mountain views, modern furniture in shades of gray and white, tasteful art on the walls, 1 bedroom, 1 bath, probably costing $4,000 a month in this market, and everywhere signs of my husband, his favorite scotch on the bar cart, his preferred brand of coffee in the kitchen. A photo on the side table, Vanessa and Ethan, at what looked like a beach, somewhere tropical, clearly together, clearly intimate. His watch on the nightstand, the Tag Heuer I'd given him for our 5th anniversary. A drawer in the bathroom with his toiletries, his razor, his cologne. He'd created a second home here, a place he could be with Vanessa without the pretense of corporate dinners or business strategy. How many nights had he claimed to be working late and actually been here? How many business trips had been covers for time in this apartment? I photographed everything. Wide shots establishing this was Vanessa's apartment based on mail visible on the counter. Close-ups of Ethan's belongings, The photo of them together, the clothes in the closet, his shirts hanging next to her dresses, the second toothbrush in the bathroom. Every piece of evidence documenting that this wasn't a casual affair. This was a second life, carefully maintained, financially supported, emotionally invested. I was in the apartment for 40 minutes, methodical and thorough. Then I left, using the service elevator Marcus had mapped out, exiting through a side door that avoided the main lobby. The taxi I'd called was waiting. Back to Seattle, I told the driver. Downtown. Patricia Monroe's law office occupied the 35th floor of a high-rise near Pike Place Market, views of Elliott Bay and the ferries shuttling back and forth. I arrived at noon, exactly as scheduled. Patricia was waiting with her associate, a sharp young attorney named David Chen, no relation to Vanessa, but coincidentally sharing her last name. We reviewed everything I'd gathered that morning, the photos from Vanessa's apartment, the evidence of Ethan's dual life. Combined with Marcus's surveillance documentation and the financial records showing systematic deception, we had an overwhelming case. "This is slam dunk territory," David said, scrolling through images on his laptop. "Clear infidelity, fraudulent financial conduct, violation of marital trust. With the prenup's morality clause, you're looking at potentially 70-30 split of all community assets in your favor, full claim to the house, and significant spousal support." "What about his Cascade equity?" I asked. "That's the complicated part," Patricia said. "The prenup designated it as separate property, but the fraud clause potentially voids that protection if we can prove he used corporate resources or time to conduct the affair. We might argue the equity should be considered community property. It's aggressive, but with this evidence, it's viable." "How do we proceed?" I asked. Patricia pulled out a timeline she'd prepared. Today, October 15th, Ethan leaves for Bali with Vanessa. They'll be gone 2 weeks. During that time, we file for divorce, serve him electronically since we have proof he's in Bali with his mistress. We include all documentation of infidelity, request immediate injunctions freezing his assets, and invoke the prenup's arbitration clause. "But here's the strategic part," Patricia continued. "We don't just file, we also send a comprehensive package to Cascade Analytics Board of Directors documenting that their VP of Product Development has been conducting an affair with an employee, using what may be corporate resources, and potentially violating the company's ethics policies." "What does that accomplish?" I asked. David answered. "It puts Ethan in a position where he's fighting on 2 fronts. Divorce proceedings where the evidence is overwhelming, and corporate investigation where his job and equity are at risk. It creates pressure to settle quickly and generously rather than drag things out. It also," Patricia added with a slight smile, "makes it very difficult for him to enjoy his vacation. Imagine being in Bali, thinking you've gotten away with everything, and receiving notice that your wife is divorcing you, your assets are frozen, and your employer is investigating you. The psychological impact is significant." I thought about Ethan on a beach with Vanessa, champagne and sunset, believing he'd successfully juggled both relationships. Thought about him checking his email and discovering his world collapsing. "Do it," I said. "File everything. Contact the board. Burn it all down." The next 2 weeks were surreal. Patricia filed the divorce petition on October 16th, including a motion for immediate protective orders. By law, Ethan had to be notified. Since he was out of the country, service was done electronically to his email and phone. Marcus confirmed he received it around midnight Bali time, based on the read receipts. I imagined him opening the email in his luxury villa, Vanessa probably asleep beside him, reading through pages of legal documentation that laid out his infidelity in clinical detail. The photos from her apartment, the financial records, the witness statements, everything he'd tried to hide, now compiled in a legal filing that removed any possibility of denial. He called 37 times that first day. I didn't answer. He sent texts ranging from confused to angry to pleading. "Mary, what is this? This is insane. We need to talk. You're misunderstanding everything. Please pick up. I'm coming home." I blocked his number. Patricia had instructed me to have zero contact, let everything go through attorneys. Patricia also sent the evidence package to Cascade Analytics Board on October 17th. Their response was swift. By October 18th, Ethan was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. By October 20th, the company had launched a formal inquiry into his relationship with Vanessa Chen and whether it violated corporate ethics policies. The tech industry blogs picked up the story by October 22nd. Not full details, but enough. VP at prominent Seattle startup on leave amid ethics investigation. Tech executive faces divorce following alleged affair with colleague. The gossip networks that made Seattle's tech scene feel like a small town went into overdrive. Jessica reported that mutual friends were shocked, confused, taking sides. Some defended Ethan, claiming I must be exaggerating or misunderstanding. Others, particularly women who'd watched their own marriages crumble to ambitious husbands and younger colleagues, expressed solidarity. The house felt enormous without Ethan. I moved through rooms we'd furnished together, seeing them differently now. The kitchen where we'd cooked dinner parties, the living room where we'd hosted friends, the bedroom where we'd slept next to each other for years while growing steadily apart. I should have felt devastated. Part of me did, grieving not for who Ethan was, but for who I'd believed him to be. But mostly I felt liberated. The uncertainty was gone. The pretense was over. I knew exactly where I stood and what I was fighting for. Ethan returned to Seattle on October 27th, cutting his vacation short by a week. Marcus's contacts confirmed he came back alone, Vanessa staying in Bali apparently to let things cool down. He tried to come to the house. I'd had the locks changed. He stood on the porch, ringing the doorbell, calling my name. I watched from the upstairs window, seeing him disheveled and desperate in a way I'd never seen before. Finally, he left. His attorney contacted Patricia the next day, requesting a meeting to discuss settlement. We met on October 30th at a neutral conference room downtown. Ethan looked terrible, like he'd aged 5 years in 2 weeks. His attorney, a man named Robert Keller, who specialized in high-asset divorces, had clearly told him the situation was dire. Patricia brought David and a forensic accountant named Linda Martinez, who'd been analyzing our finances. Robert started with standard defense positioning. My client acknowledges mistakes were made in the marriage. He's willing to discuss equitable division of assets and reasonable support arrangements. However, we believe the prenup should be honored in its original spirit. Mistakes were made, Patricia repeated, her tone mild but dangerous. That's an interesting characterization of a systematic affair involving financial fraud. She opened her laptop, turned it so everyone could see. These are charges to Vanessa Chen's apartment. Rent paid from Ethan's personal account, $48,000 annually for the past year. That's community property being dissipated on an extramarital affair. She clicked through more slides. Gifts, jewelry $9,000, clothing $6,000, electronics $4,000, travel expenses beyond the Bali trip, weekend getaways to Portland, San Francisco, Cabo San Lucas. Conservatively, Ethan spent over $100,000 of community funds maintaining this affair. Linda continued the presentation. Additionally, cell phone records show approximately 40% of Ethan's calls and texts over the past 8 months were to Vanessa Chen. If even a portion of that occurred during work hours, on company time, using company resources, it constitutes misuse of corporate assets. Cascade Analytics is conducting their own investigation, but their findings will likely support termination for cause. Ethan's face had gone gray. Robert tried to regroup. We can discuss restitution for disputed expenditures, but the Cascade equity should remain separate property per the prenup's original designation. Patricia shook her head. The prenup's Section 7 explicitly voids protections in case of infidelity and fraud. Both conditions are met. Section 12 additionally voids equity protections if employment involves fraudulent conduct. Ethan's affair with a subordinate, if it influenced business decisions or resource allocation, meets that threshold. We're not asking for separate property protections to hold. We're stating they're already void, per the prenup's own terms. She slid a settlement proposal across the table. 75% of all community assets to Meredith, full ownership of the marital home in Madison Park, current value $2.4 million. 50% of Ethan's Cascade Analytics equity, vested and unvested, current estimated value $28 million based on last funding round. Spousal support of $15,000 monthly for 10 years. Ethan keeps his personal retirement accounts and whatever's left of his personal savings after restitution. This is extortion, Robert said, but his tone lacked conviction. This is consequence, Patricia corrected. Your client violated his prenup, committed marital fraud, and potentially damaged his own career through poor judgment. We're offering a settlement that's actually generous, considering we could push for more. The alternative is arbitration, where all of this becomes more public, more detailed, and more damaging to whatever professional reputation Ethan has left. Can we have a moment? Robert asked. Patricia nodded, and the attorney stepped out. I stayed, facing Ethan across the conference table for the first time since he'd left for Bali. You're destroying me, he said quietly. You destroyed us, I replied. I spent 8 years building a marriage while you built an exit strategy. Don't pretend this is about my reaction. This is about your choices. I loved you, Ethan said, and he might have even believed it. I tried to make it work with both. That's not how love works, I said. Love doesn't hedge bets. Love doesn't create backup plans. You wanted Vanessa but didn't want to give up the stability and respectability I provided. That's not love. That's convenience. What about what I gave you? He asked, anger creeping in. This house, the lifestyle, everything you've enjoyed. I earned that too, I said firmly. I supported your career, managed our home, sacrificed my own opportunities for your ambitions. You don't get credit for providing a lifestyle funded by community property while secretly spending that same property on someone else. The attorneys returned. Robert looked defeated. My client will accept division of community assets at 65-35, house to Meredith, 15% of Cascade equity to Meredith, spousal support at $10,000 monthly for 7 years. 70-30, Patricia countered. House to Meredith, 35% of Cascade equity, $12,000 monthly for 8 years, and a confidentiality clause that prevents Ethan from discussing details of the marriage or divorce publicly. Ethan looked at Robert, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Fine, Ethan said. I'll sign. The settlement was drafted over the next week. On November 7th, less than a month after discovering the affair, Ethan and I signed divorce papers in Patricia's office. He wouldn't look at me. We didn't speak except when legally required. The arbitrator Patricia's firm had recommended reviewed everything and approved the settlement on November 15th. By December 1st, the divorce was final. I got the house, approximately $14 million in liquid assets from Community Property Division, and 35% of Ethan's Cascade equity. At current private valuation, that was worth roughly $10 million, though it wouldn't vest fully for another 3 years. Total, I walked away with approximately $24 million in assets and property, plus guaranteed spousal support for 8 years. Ethan got to keep his job, though his reputation in Seattle tech circles was permanently damaged. The board investigation concluded he'd shown poor judgment, but hadn't committed financial crimes against the company. He was demoted from VP to director, his equity compensation cut significantly, his trajectory toward executive leadership effectively ended. Vanessa Chen resigned from Cascade Analytics in late November, taking a position at a competitor in San Francisco. Whether she and Ethan maintained their relationship, I didn't know and didn't care. They'd built their connection on deception and stolen time. Let them see how it functioned in actual daylight. Jessica hosted a divorce party in mid-December, inviting 24 of my closest friends. We drank champagne on my deck overlooking Lake Washington, toasting new beginnings and bullet dodged. You seem happy, Jessica observed, refilling my glass. I am, I said, realizing it was true. Not happy the marriage ended, but happy I discovered the truth before wasting more years. Happy I fought smart instead of just fighting angry. "What's next?" she asked. I'd been thinking about that. The settlement gave me financial security I'd never had before. No need to work for income, freedom to choose projects based on interest rather than necessity. "I think I'm going to travel," I said. "All the places Ethan and I talked about but never made time for. Except now I'll go alone, on my terms, with no one scheduled to accommodate but my own." "You should go to Bali," Jessica said with a wicked grin. "Stay at the Amanusa, post photos all over Instagram. Show him you're living the life he tried to steal." I laughed, but the idea had merit. Not for revenge, but for reclamation. Taking the trip that was supposed to be ours and making it mine. Christmas came, my first alone in a decade. My parents flew in from Ohio, concerned about how I was handling everything. I showed them the settlement, the house, the plans I was making. My father, the retired attorney who'd taught me to think strategically, smiled with unmistakable pride. "You played this perfectly," he said. "Gathered evidence, built an airtight case, negotiated from strength. I'm sorry your marriage ended, but I'm proud of how you handled it." On New Year's Eve, I stood on my deck watching fireworks over Lake Washington, thinking about the year that had passed, the email that changed everything, the investigation I'd conducted, the 2 weeks Ethan spent in Bali while his life imploded, the settlement that secured my future. I'd gone from wife to detective to divorcee in less than 3 months, and somehow I'd emerged stronger. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. "Happy New Year, Meredith. Here's to new chapters and knowing your worth." I raised my champagne glass to the fireworks, to the future, to the version of myself who'd been strong enough to choose truth over comfortable lies. In February, I booked a trip to Bali. Not the Amanusa, but a small boutique resort I'd researched myself. I went alone, spent 2 weeks exploring temples and rice terraces, learning to surf, eating incredible food. I posted a few photos on Instagram, not tagging locations but making it clear I was somewhere tropical and beautiful. Ethan never commented, but mutual friends reported he'd seen them. I hoped they stung. I hoped he understood what he'd lost. But mostly, I hoped he understood that I'd won. Not just the financial settlement, not just the house and equity and support payments. I'd won my freedom, my self-respect, and my future. He'd tried to have it all, wife and mistress, stability and excitement, respectability and recklessness. Instead, he'd lost the person who'd actually loved him, damaged his career, and ended up with exactly what he deserved, the consequences of his choices. On the flight back from Bali, I wrote in the journal I'd brought. Lessons learned, boundaries established, promises to myself. I would never again ignore my intuition when something felt wrong. I would never again make myself small to accommodate someone else's ambitions. I would never again stay in a relationship that required pretending rather than connecting. Landing in Seattle felt like coming home to a place that was actually mine now. Not ours, not his. Not a shared space full of compromises and unspoken resentments. Mine. The taxi driver who picked me up at the airport asked if I'd enjoyed my vacation. It was perfect, I told him honestly, exactly what I needed. We drove through the city I loved, past the neighborhoods and landmarks that had been my backdrop for a decade. The Space Needle glinting in afternoon sun, the ferries crossing Elliott Bay, the mountains visible in the distance, permanent and patient. As we turned onto my street in Madison Park, I saw my house, my beautiful craftsman with its lake views and renovated kitchen and garden I'd be able to enjoy this spring. Inside were my things, arranged how I wanted them, with no one else's preferences to consider. Tomorrow, I'd meet with an investment advisor about managing the settlement funds. Next week, I had coffee scheduled with a woman who ran a nonprofit supporting domestic violence survivors, a conversation about how I might contribute. Next month, there was a marketing conference in Austin I was considering attending, reconnecting with my career on my terms. But today, I was just a woman coming home from Bali, tanned and rested and free. A woman who'd discovered her husband's betrayal and turned it into her liberation. A woman who'd chosen strategy over emotion, documentation over confrontation, and patience over impulse. A woman who'd taken a taxi to one address instead of boarding a plane, and in doing so had taken control of her entire future. The driver unloaded my suitcase. "Welcome home," he said. "Thank you," I replied, tipping him generously. "It's good to be back." I walked up to my front door, unlocked it with my key, stepped into my house, and closed the door on the past. Somewhere in Seattle, Ethan was living with the consequences of his choices. Somewhere Vanessa Chen was building a life that began with deception. But here, in this house, in this life, I was building something new, something honest, something mine, something that required no pretense and demanded no performance. Just truth, hard-won and fiercely protected. The end.